Hey everybody, Jane here, and I just read Underneath the Whispering Door, and I want to talk about it.
Pictures and patterns put into words that stream across the page, capturing life as soft spoken.
Okay, so I had read Cerulean Sea a couple years ago, and I gave it a 4 star. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And honestly, Underneath the Whispering Door for me feels like a lot of the same. So we're going to have a spoilery discussion about it. I figure a lot of people have read this by now. And if you haven't, maybe you didn't really want to anyway. So if you don't want spoilers, this video is probably not for you, but we're just going to get into some of it. I'm not going to spoil I'll probably just spoil everything. So let's just talk about it. And we're going to talk about Cerulean Sea too, because I want to do a comparison for these. So, Underneath the Whispering Door starts with our character Wallace, who is horrible. But I will say one thing I liked is that we know he's horrible and we know he's supposed to be horrible. So underneath this Cerulean Sea book, I didn't like Linus. And Linus I think is supposed to be unlikable, but he's the main character. But he's unlikable in a much more subtle way than Wallace is. So underneath the Whispering Door, we have Wallace. And Wallace is just unlikable, but he's clearly intended to be. He is Scrooge. He's Ebenezer Scrooge, puts corporations and money and stuff above people. Whereas in Cerulean Sea, it was largely like Linus is a cog, but Linus doesn't know he's horrible and a cog. He is just a cog. And we're not really supposed to, I think, he doesn't seem terrible. He seems naive. And he seems self-righteous, but I hated Linus, and I didn't necessarily have the same negativity towards Wallace, even though Wallace is clearly a worse person than Linus ever was. So in the very first scene, we have Wallace firing a woman unjustly. And then shortly after, Wallace dies of a heart attack. And we have May, who's a Reaper, show up. And she is, they like watch his funeral and see the whole, like, the beginning of this very much reminded me of a Christmas Carol, or a Christmas Carol vibes. So you have the bad dude, and he's at his funeral and he's watching and nobody's mourning him. And everybody's kind of like, Wallace is dead. That's a shame. He was a really good business dude. And like he's got an ex-wife who's there and she's like, like it sucks he died, but I don't care. And that's just kind of the general vibe. So May, who's the Reaper, takes him to this, what they call it, a way station. One of the challenges I had in Cerulean Sea was I didn't necessarily think the setting was as well explained as it could have been. And in some ways I felt that way about the way station. So most of the world in Whispering Door is the same as our world, but this way station is kind of a different place. It's a place, it on the surface in our world, it is a tea shop. So if you were to walk in, it's a tea shop. It's nothing special in that regard. So I didn't need a lot of explanation. It's a tea shop. But it's a way station for ghosts to get ready to cross over. So on the 3rd floor, they have this little door, and the door is to whatever's after. And I'm not entirely clear still on why. Like, why characters need this. Because we see 5 people go through the door by the end of the book, and nobody has maybe one person has legitimately used the door the way it's supposed to be used, question mark. We'll get there. So anyway, you have Wallace, who is like, why am I here? And they're like, you're here to get ready to go through your door and to accept that you're dead and this and that and this. And Wallace is like, I'm not accepting. I just want my life back. And they're like, yeah, you're not getting that. So for a while, Wallace just hangs at the tea shop and gets to know the people there. You have Hugo, who is the ferryman, whose job it is to kind of help people cross over. You have May, who we've already met, who's the Reaper, and her job is to bring them to Hugo and also to like help Hugo. She works at this coffee shop and helps him in different ways. Hugo also is gay, and Wallace is bi. So like Wallace and Hugo pretty quickly start having some feelings to each other, even though Wallace is dead. And that's cute and cool-ish, but also kind of weird. So, the other people that you have there, you have Apollo, who's a dog, who had helped Hugo when Apollo was alive. Hugo has some anxiety issues. Hugo's parents died, and Hugo has had kind of a rough time. He was also raised by his grandfather, Nelson, who is also a ghost hanging around. So we've got all these ghosties hanging around. So we've got Nelson and Apollo, ghosties, who are always at the tea shop, and then Hugo, who's a new ghostie, or I'm sorry, Wallace, who's a new ghostie. Then you've got alive May and alive Hugo. So Wallace takes a long time adjusting. He learns about some stuff that had happened before. He learns about this girl who'd come in and was forced through the door by their last Reaper before she was ready to be. And her mother feels her presence there and is in mourning and comes to this shop all the time. And that's a little important to the plot later. We also learn about this guy named Cameron, who was there and who the last Reaper kind of scared off. And now Cameron has gone out into the world and become a husk. So I don't really... when you leave, if you are dead and you leave the way station, bad things happen. And like, so Cameron is this thing called a husk. He's left the way station, and he's basically a monster who they say or think doesn't have any, like, their soul is I don't know. The husk wasn't as well explained as I would like. They don't know, but they're told like they're unfixable. They've left they look awful. Their skin has like flaked away, and they're just monsters wandering the world in pain. So basically not a lot of plot happens for the majority of the novel. You have Wallace hanging with the other ghosties and everybody at the way station, and like he is undergoing changes. He's falling in love with Hugo. He's realizing he maybe wasn't the best person, and he's learning about some different way station stuff. And then he ultimately, the manager shows up, and the manager he's not God, but he's like a death god-ish. I don't know. And he shows up and he's like, listen, Wallace, you got to get a move on here. You've been here a long time. Time's a ticking. Get over the fact you're dead and go through your door. And Wallace is like, I don't want to. And the manager is like, I don't care. You're going to go in 1 week. So, and then this is like the end of the book and where the plot actually picks up. So Wallace is like trying to be like, okay, how do I spend the last week of my existence before I go through this door? And of course, you know, he's in love with Hugo by then. So they're spending some time together, but also like the mother of the girl who was forced through the door, they do stuff to give her peace. And then they find Cameron, and they find out that even though he's a husk, he can like be brought back. So they like bring him back and get him crossed over. And also Wallace calls his wife and has Hugo call his wife and be like, yeah, Wallace is sorry he was such a dick to you. And she's like, I don't really care, and I'm kind of over it, but thanks for calling. But anyway, so Wallace is trying to set things right. And then at the very end, the manager comes and is like, oh, well, there's a lot of husks in the world, and you guys figured out how to solve the husk problem. So I'm going to resurrect Wallace and let him stay here with Hugo and work on these husks. Okay. So that's the plot, and I have so many things I want to talk about. Firstly, I like that it's a redemption story, but this felt so much like Cerulean Sea, but I don't think it had. I really, in Cerulean Sea, House in the Cerulean Sea, loved the kids and the orphanage plot and all of that, and this did not have any of the beauty of that. So I really felt a little bit let down by it. I was like, this is a lot of the same beats of the Cerulean Sea story with this unlikable character who is getting redeemed and falling in love with a dude during his redemption story. And like that is literally the plot of this book. But at least in Cerulean Sea we had the cute little kids, and while we have zany, cool side characters in this one, I didn't think any of them had the charm of the Cerulean Sea children cast. Apollo is adorable. He's a dog. He can only go so bad with the dog. But like, I didn't really care that much, and I wasn't very invested. And I was mad at the end. This whole, we're going to resurrect Wallace. Of all the things you could do. Now, I think most readers are going to absolutely love that. I think that's was done because that's what readers want. They want that hopeful, happy story. I was mad about it because it felt like a cop-out. It was a whole freaking cop-out of, we've killed Wallace, but we want Wallace to be able to be with Hugo, so we're going to bring him back to life and let him, bone Hugo. And, like, I'm happy for Wallace and Hugo. Great. I'm happy for you. Wallace was dead. He was dead for weeks. Why are we resurrecting him? Is there nothing else the writer could have done? Even send Wallace through his door and then have, like, a happy Hugo dies and is reunited with him thing. No. We resurrect Wallace so that he and Hugo can bone and have a good life together. Like, I'd have even been okay if the manager had been like, okay, Wallace, you can stay here and you and Hugo can, like, do your thing as you as a ghost, like, but, until Hugo dies and then you can pass on together. I would have been okay with that too. But resurrecting him so that him and Hugo can bone, and so that you can have, like, a happy ever after while they fix these husk type things. Dude, I wasn't feeling that. And I also didn't really ever understand what Wallace was actually doing there. Like, was it purgatory? Were they trying to get him redeemed so that he could go to heaven and not have to go to hell? Like, we don't get any indication that that's the case. Like, what are you doing here? What is this way station for? And I didn't like that. I felt like this book really let me down. But I also, felt I didn't love Cerulean Sea. I liked Cerulean Sea. And this had cute moments and cute characters, and it wasn't terrible, and I gave it 4 stars. But it felt so much like Cerulean Sea. I didn't really understand what the spirits are supposed to do. I did mention people got forced through. So the first girl, she got forced through. She had been ill, and her reaper or whatever, pushed her through the door kicking and screaming, and it was a bad situation. Then, briefly while Wallace is there, they have this guy named Alan. And Alan is really angry, and he's causing problems, and so the manager comes and, forces him through the door. I'm like, okay, so this crossover thing isn't mandatory. You can just force people through the door. What is purpose? What happens to the spirits who are forced through the door and it's not a great experience? What? Because you can push them through the door without consent. And, the manager makes it seem like it's all a consent thing. Oh, no, I want people to consent to go through the door. But if they don't, you push them. And even with Wallace, you were like, hey, you've taken too long. You have 1 week. Get your stuff together. And it's not even stuff from your life. It's you are stuck at this way station or stuck with Hugo. And yeah, I had some issues. I didn't think it was a bad book. I thought it was an entertaining book. I'm glad I listened to it on audiobook because it was also a very slow book. I didn't necessarily at any point want to DNF it, but I definitely multiple times was like, can we move along? I did like that, it set up like a Christmas Carol, so we knew that it was a redemption story. One thing for me that sometimes drives me crazy is I want to know what the plot is going forward. Like, I want to know at the beginning of the book, where are we going? And I knew that we were doing some kind of redemption arc with Wallace, like from the get-go. That is set up perfectly. So I knew where we were going. It just was a meandering journey to get there. Sometimes it was a fun journey. Sometimes there was cuteness and fun things. Like Nelson is trying to teach Wallace at one point how to change his ghost clothes. And that was cute and that was fun. And there's some funniness to that. I will say, because of the cover art and also because I had a very similar experience with Cerulean Sea, in my brain, when I'm like watching the movie unfold in my brain, everything was cartoonish. And that was the case I had with Cerulean Sea as well. And I think, again, because this is a lot of ghosts and stuff, it bids that way. So in my brain, all of this is very like animated instead of like live action, like some things are when the stories play out in my head. So this does have like a cartoonish, fantastic quality to it. And I don't, so I had fun. I had a good time with this book. I just felt like the end was a cop-out. I felt like there was a lot of things that were unexplained. And while I'll probably read more stuff from this author, I feel like this author, I love their writing and their character work, and I feel like they could really give me a story that just pow and knocks it out of the park. And so far, I haven't been knocked out of the park yet. I've left both books with, this is an above average book, but I wanted it to be more, and I'm a little disappointed in what I got. I don't hear this one talked about nearly as much as Cerulean Sea, so it's possible that other people kind of were like, oh, it's reskinned Cerulean Sea, which it kind of is. So, yeah. If you've read Underneath the Whispering Door, tell me your thoughts about it. If you made it to the end of this video, please leave a little book emoji at the bottom. This has been Jane, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!